is Ashley Nilsen. She's an on-scene coordinator with EPA in Region 3 for the last 5 years, and before that, she was a multimedia inspector for EPA. She'll be speaking on a local Region 3 emergency response. Thank you, Ashley.
Morning, everyone. Today I'm going to discuss the Reading Drum emergency response. You can see a little bit of a picture of midstream here, but we'll go ahead and just walk through how this all happened. So on October 31st, the local fire department responded to a fire at the former Lincoln Chemical Company. They also responded with the county and PADEP. At the time of this fire, they noted that there were several drums of chemicals in the basement of the building. Luckily, that portion of the building was not impacted by this fire. So we started getting phone calls, talking to the state about this building and potentially going out and sort of assessing the condition of those containers the very next day on November the 1st. As we were planning to go out the following Monday to do an assessment, we got a call that there was another fire at the facility. This was on November 2nd. We responded to the second fire along with PADEP and county and local responders. Essentially, now we're concerned about the fire potentially impacting the chemicals that are stored in the basement of the facility. And we started to set up air monitoring around the facility to protect the local community. We'll go to the next one there. So we deployed some air monitoring late into the night or very early into the morning on November 3rd. And we placed some boom at an outfall. The fire water runoff was going into some storm drains and was creating a lot of foam. This was not due to firefighting foam being applied to the fire, but was actually due to the surfactants, the soaps that were being manufactured at this facility. There was some residuals on the floor and other parts of the building that were washing out with the fire water and creating bubbles. Go ahead to the next one here. So the fire was finally put out fully on November the 4th. And we were able to make our first entries into the drum storage area of the building in the basement. We initially made an entry in level B, which is a fully suited up with air packs to do some air monitoring inside the building to make sure that our workers would be safe in making this entry. And then went in and really assessed the containers that we had. And as you can see, there's many, many containers in here in various states of disrepair. Go ahead to the next slide. So over the next couple of days, we continued to make short, purposeful entries into the building to catalog the chemicals and sort them into different areas of the site that were safe for temporary storage and really stabilize any containers that were damaged. So we expected to sort of continue that work in the coming days, but we had a safety stand down on November the 9th. Essentially due to the cooling that occurred after the fire of the structure and the rapid change in temperatures of the building materials, we had a structural beam disconnect from a wall in the structure. So during the morning of November 9th, the structural inspection, it did not pass. The fire marshal's office said it was not safe for us to continue to entering the structure at that time. And they performed additional demolition work on the building after, for their structural evaluation. So during the period of November 10th to 16th, there was sort of continued demolition of the building. As you can see here, the entire third story of the building is gone. And they started really pulling apart some of the first and second floors as well to stabilize the building. Due to that beam disconnection from the wall. Once it was deemed safe for us to enter, we continued to make entries into that area to catalog chemicals, stabilize materials, and sort things into their appropriate categories. We can go ahead to the next one. This is just some PPE, some personal protective equipment that our folks wear when going into the structure. As we get into late November, throughout this time, we have our mobile laboratory on site, which you're seeing in this photo here. We continue to investigate what's in the building, take full inventory of it, categorize it using our on-site laboratory equipment here, field screening equipment, doing some tests like hascading tests, and running the material through this machine that you see, the red machine called the Threat ID, which kind of takes a look at the material and tries to identify it. Then we moved those containers to safe temporary storage in the structure. By December 1st, we had about 75% of the materials in the building identified tentatively through field screening, and we continued air monitoring to make sure that things remained below levels of concern. Every day we were on site, the local emergency responders, the fire marshal's office did a structural inspection to make sure it was continued to be safe for us to operate as the building further deteriorated due to weather. We continued to find materials in the building that were slightly different from soap manufacturing chemicals. So we continued to find little surprises along the way. Here you see depicted some of our field screening testing showing a very, very strong acid, literally kind of starting to burn the pH strips here. So we can go ahead to the next slide. Throughout the rest of December, we sort of continued to categorize materials, stabilize containers, and conduct air monitoring. We did start to see rainwater buildup on the structure as we started to get some major rain events. There were a couple of areas of the building that we really needed access to that were starting to fill with water. These areas did not have spilled chemicals or compounds in them, so we were able to collect that rainwater, run it through our mobile laboratory, and then work with the local sewer authority to discharge that rainwater in a way that was safe and would not impact the plant. As we were able to stabilize containers, we started moving them out of the damaged portion of the structure where the fire occurred. And we were able to move them to a garage area in the building that was more stable, that we could basically segregate materials once they were stabilized and prepare them for offsite shipment. This work continued into January and early February. We also started to collect samples to send for analytical to the laboratory in late December, early January, to allow us to get more information on each material so that we could properly dispose of this material offsite at the end of this project. So here you just see more work going on in our mobile laboratory under our fume hood, where they're doing some additional categorization and testing of some of the materials that came out of drums, totes, and other containers in the structure. Throughout this response up to this point, we were communicating through local media as well as mailers to local residents to make sure that everyone stayed informed of what was going on the site. Here you kind of see a much cleaner picture of the basement area of the structure where that original picture of all those drums were. This was kind of our final container to leave that area of the structure. This was a big milestone for us as we were able to kind of close up that area of the structure for good, since that area was continuing to deteriorate with additional weather impacts due to its openness to the environment. We were able to really clean up the floor in that structure from any spills that had occurred before we arrived, and leave it in a state where it was no longer going to be a threat to the community. We staged all of the materials that were now stabilized and ready for shipment in the garage portion of the structure that is structurally stable and also protected from the elements. Once we got to this point in late January, early February, we had done 3 months of air sampling in this area as we were conducting work and did not find levels that were hazardous to the community. So we halted air monitoring at this point since all of the containers were stabilized and staged by waste stream in that central staging, our garage area. Our building drains were cleared of debris, and we stabilized all of the materials to kind of hunker them down and prepare them for shipment. Again, a lot of sampling involved in this. So this is just a photograph of some of the samples that came out of different containers. And we had a wide variety of materials at the site. These are now all staged and ready for disposal. And we are currently, setting up for disposal. We have some disposal contractors set up to come out at the end of this month and start shipping stuff off site, which is very exciting to get this material out of this community. We have more information available in English and Spanish at the EPA story map for this site, and there are links provided here. But in conclusion, it was really a coordinated effort between the local responders, the county, and the state with us, EPA, to really get the site back to where it needed to be cleaned up and ready for beneficial reuse. So thanks.
Thank you, Ashley. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mike Brandt and Austin Harmon. Mike is the Response Operations Branch Chief for FEMA Region 3 and has been with the agency for 15 years. Austin is the Mission Assignment Manager for FEMA Region 3 and has been with FEMA for 3 years.
Thanks, Melissa. Good morning, everybody. Again, my name's Mike Brandt. This is Austin behind me. So we're going to kind of cover what FEMA or how FEMA responds to disasters and other responses. So as we go through the slides, a lot of what we're going to cover will probably be more focused on hurricane responses. Those are typically our larger efforts and more complex responses. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, so here at FEMA Region 3, we have a regional watch center, which is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The Regional Watch Center is responsible for facilitating our information sharing, identifying threats, providing incident and threat alerts, notifications, things like that. And this is really where most of our responses begin. So, just for example, a couple weeks ago, we had the Key Bridge collapse down in Baltimore. Our watch center was monitoring a lot of different feeds, saw that it occurred, and immediately started issuing reports, made notifications to our leadership, and we started discussing what our potential response should be. So that's our regional watch center, and again, that's where most of our responses will begin. Next slide. Okay, so moving on to our Regional Response Coordination Center, or RRCC, as I'll call it henceforth. When the event that we're responding to has the potential to result in a major disaster declaration by the president, we will activate typically our Regional Response Coordination Center. So the RRCC is essentially an emergency operations center where all of our incident support activities are executed. It's staffed by FEMA Region 3 employees here in Philadelphia, but also our emergency support function partners, which are other federal agencies that assist us in response. And we'll talk about them in a little bit. And the type of things that we provide from the RRCC are sourcing and ordering resources to meet state requests, conducting analysis of the threats and hazards posed by the disaster, deploying all of our regional level resources, coordinating the overall federal response, and conducting consequence management planning. Next slide. So the term that we use to discuss the two terms that we use to discuss how we respond to emergencies that you'll hear is incident support and incident management. So incident support is what we provide here from the regional level and also at our headquarters level at the National Response Coordination Center, and that's the push of resources. Incident management is what our field teams do, our incident management assistance teams, which I'll talk about a little later. and they're responsible for the pull of resources. So they are deployed and will work with our state partners, other partners, to build requirements, look at what capabilities are needed, and then they will push that request to us at the Regional Response Coordination Center. We'll try and fill it, and then we'll send it down back to the state so that those resources can be deployed. Next slide, please. I mentioned a little earlier, our emergency support functions. There are 15 of them, and these are all of our partners, pretty much all federal agencies that will support us, but also some other government organizations and nonprofits. Each ESF is represented by a primary agency. So ESF1 is the U.S. Department of Transportation. Our friends at the EPA represent ESF10. We work with all of our ESF partners when we're responding to build requirements that will eventually develop into mission assignments, which are resources that are actually pushed out to the field to support the states and any unmet needs that they have. Next slide, please. So as we're planning our response to the disaster, we determine our activation level. So starting at the bottom of this chart, steady state, this is basically what we're at, most days of the week when there's, no disaster activity going on. This is our Regional Watch Center, just providing that 24-hour situational awareness of what's going on in the region. As we move up the chart, our enhanced watch, that's a very limited team that we have. It's typically about 12 or 15 people that will activate into our Regional Response Coordination Center, and they'll respond to different events. So if we have one of our national special security events, like the State of the Union, the inauguration, any kind of major, international summits, we'll typically activate to an enhanced watch with just that smaller team. We can also do a phased response. So if we're monitoring, say, a tropical storm out in the Atlantic Basin, and we're 10 to 14 days prior to landfall, we can activate the enhanced watch to just start our initial planning to respond to that. So then again, moving up the chart, our level 3 activation, this is our minimal staffing level in the RRCC, really, where we're getting into the actual response phase. So as a level 3, that is pretty much all FEMA staff. We may have 1 or 2 emergency support functions supporting us, but typically it's FEMA staff when we're doing coordination of our own FEMA resources. Moving up to our level 2 activation, that we're adding a lot of FEMA staff, but this is where we're starting to bring in a lot more of our emergency support function partners. So, we initially may ask for the Army Corps of Engineers, EPA, Health and Human Services, Urban Search and Rescue to staff in and start looking at building requirements, which will obviously take us into our level 1 activation. So, in this scenario, think we have a major category 3 or higher hurricane that's about to impact, say, like the Hampton Roads or the Delmarva Peninsula. We'll activate to a level 1. This is all of our federal resources, all of our FEMA staff. We're probably running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week until the disaster, starts to transition to recovery. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'd like to talk about some of our other teams that we use to support. And again, this will be a very hurricane focused. So our first team that we have is our hurricane liaison teams. So we have 2 planners here in Region 3 that are solely focused on hurricane planning. During a hurricane, they'll embed with the National Weather Service, the National Hurricane Center down in Miami, Florida, which you can see in the picture there, and then also deploy out to our state emergency operations centers and provide technical assistance to those. Next slide, please. So next up are our liaison officers. So we maintain a roster of collateral duty liaison officers that come from internally within Region 3. Their functions to be the principal conduit of information and protocol between Region 3 and wherever they're assigned. So typically early on in an incident, we can send a liaison officer out to either the State Emergency Operations Center or a local or county emergency operations center to build awareness for us, also provide that whatever entity they're deployed to information on FEMA programs and such. Just for example, the Key Bridge collapse last month that I think occurred around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. We had a liaison officer in the Maryland DOC, I think by 4 a.m. So we're able to move our liaison officers out to the field very, very quickly, and they provide that initial contact with our state partners. Next slide, please. So next is our FEMA integration teams. These are full-time staff that we have embedded with our state emergency management agencies and in a few other locations. Our FIT teams are will day-to-day provide on-site technical assistance and rapid delivery of FEMA programs. So typically, these are our first liaison officers that will actually get deployed out to a state emergency operations center, because usually they'll just work right down the hall. They have an office or a desk at state emergency management agency. and they can be our first liaison whenever any type of disaster response is beginning. Next slide, please. So next up is our incident management assistance teams. So our IMAT teams are the teams that we will actually deploy out to a state emergency operations center to work directly with the state on the disaster response. And then they will be the federal presence after a major or an emergency declaration is declared for that state. Here in Region 3, we have 3 IMAT teams. We have IMAT Team 1, which is a full-time team. So they're part of our response division. Their job is to either train to deploy or deploy out to disasters, and that's their only role, and that's our primary team. We additionally have 2 collateral teams, our IMATs Red and Blue, so they're made up of staff from around the regional office. We can send them out to other states as well. And then we have at our West Virginia FEMA integration team, we have a small staff that can serve as an incident management team in West Virginia as well. So really we have 4. But these are our teams that are, primarily out in the field coordinating the initial disaster response after the LNOs rise. Okay, so talking about our pre-position resources. So again, for hurricanes, we usually have a little bit of advanced warning. Really for some of the no notice type events that we'll respond to, we really can't pre-position anything. So, this includes federal teams. So if we know there's any type of team that we're going to mission assign, like the Army Corps of Engineers, power restoration teams, any type of EPA team, or our urban search and rescue teams, we can pre-position them at sites identified around the region so that they can get into the field and start supporting the states a lot faster. This also includes all of our commodities that FEMA provides. So think, water, meals, generators, shelter needs, infant and toddler kits. All of those have pre-identified locations where we can stage them within the region so that they can get out into the field faster. Okay, next slide. So our logistics branch is responsible for most of the planning for our regional staging. Primarily, a lot of our resources will initially go to an incident support base. These are larger installations and they're managed by FEMA headquarters. So within Region 3, our primary incident support bases will be Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst over in New Jersey, Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg down in North Carolina, and then Wright-Patterson Air Force Base out in Ohio. Those are our primary hubs for staging resources. And then within Region 3 here, we have what are called federal staging areas, a little smaller, but these are controlled by Region 3, and those are Martinsburg National Guard Base, I think out in West Virginia, Dover Air Force Base, and then Fort Walker. And we have a few other sites also around the region that we can stage resources at, though usually a little smaller footprint than the major incident support bases. Some of the other things that we do are our engagement with the private sector. Here in Region 3, our External Affairs Office has several private sector liaisons. We stand up during a disaster, our Regional Business Emergency Operations Center. This is a virtual operations center, so we will invite different industry partners in for a dialogue on any kind of unmet needs among the private sector. And then the next 3 are East Coast Corridor Coalition, Multi-State Fleet Response Working Group, and the Data-Driven Decision Making, working group. All support our supply chain and logistics decision making as well. Next slide. And then finally, it takes me to our federal coordinating officer. So once the president declares an emergency or a disaster declaration for a state, an FCO, a federal coordinating officer, is appointed to manage the federal resources during that disaster, and they're the primary point of contact for the state. They are the lead federal official that supports the Unified Coordination Group, which also includes the state coordinating officer, which is a state employee, and then other federal officials, whether they be federal, state, or local. Key here is that we are always in support of our state partners. We don't take the lead, we support them. So in coordination with our state partners, we will determine and establish joint incident objectives in support of the actual state. And then finally, last slide here, just a summary of some of our hurricane preparation snapshot is which we're following right now as we head into hurricane season. We conduct preseason meetings with all of our states, so we kind of cover like different changes to any of the forecast tools that the states can use from the National Weather Service, updates to our planning products. Our operations branch, my branch, and our logistics branch will hold workshops with all of our state and local partners to provide any kind of technical assistance that we need. We provide hurricane evacuation studies to our most hurricane-prone states that talk about evacuation timing and behavior analysis, things like that. So that's kind of where we are in our hurricane preparation snapshot, and hopefully covered everything for you on the FEMA emergency response side.
Thank you, Mike. Up next, I'd like to introduce Joel Blanco-Gonzalez. He's our FEMA EPA emergency planner in Region 3 and coordinates federal response to actual or potential oil and hazardous material releases for Region 3 Superfund Emergency Management Division. He has previously served as an environmental engineer for EPA Region 3 in the Water Division, addressing water pollution by regulating point sources that discharge pollutants to the waters of the U.S. He also was a sustainability advisor and water advisor for FEMA Region 2 and EPA Region 2 in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, implementing the Puerto Rico Recovery Plan to ensure recovery, sustainability, and tribal and resiliency, and an environmental engineer for EPA Office of International and Tribal Affairs in EPA Region 4 Water Division, and worked with the U.S. Agency for International Development, addressing bilateral, regional, and global environmental challenges and advancing U.S. foreign policy objectives in Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, the Dominican Republic, and Panama. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, Melissa, for the introduction. Good morning. I will be talking about the Mid-Atlantic Region Emergency Program, which is composed of preparedness, response, recovery, mitigation, and prevention. Also, I will be touching base with FEMA's and EPA's collaborations. Next slides. For this presentation, I will briefly cover response and how it works. Here's an outline of my presentation. Next. What is the National Contingency Plan? It's the federal blueprint for responding to all discharges and hazardous substance releases. Next. The National Contingency Plan provides the framework for the national response system and establishes how it works. Next. What are the National Contingency Plan authorities? First, Clean Water Act, second, Oil Pollution Act, and third, Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act, which is also known as the National Oil and Hazardous Substance Pollution Contingency Plan, the NCP. Next. The National Contingency Plan describes the organizational structure and procedures for preparing for and responding to an oil or hazardous substance incident. This system is called the National Response System. EPA and Coast Guard coordinate and direct the response, generally EPA for inland areas and Coast Guard for the coastal zone. Other federal agencies with appropriate jurisdiction and expertise support the lead agency. Also, activities are done in partnership with state and local officials. Next. National Contingency Plan and the National Response Framework and Stafford Act. Responses under the National Contingency Plan may employ EPA-issued funding and or Coast Guard-issued funding for responding to an incident. Responses under the National Response Framework and Stafford Act may employ FEMA-issued funding for responding to an emergency or a major disaster. What is the Stafford Act? The Stafford Act establishes the legal authority for most federal disaster response activities, especially as they pertain to FEMA and FEMA programs. Next. The Stafford Act authorizes the president to declare a major disaster or emergency based on the request of the governor or state or territory or the request of a tribal chief executive. Also, the Stafford Act defines what is an emergency, as well as it defines what is a major disaster. Of note, the federal assistance available for emergencies is more limited than that is available for major disasters. Next. 44 CFR which entitled the Emergency Management and Assistance Program. It is also related to the Staff Work Act, which is the law that authorizes mission assignments, and 40 CFR is the interpretation of the law. 44 CFR provides the regulations that implement the law and provides the definition of mission assignments. Among many responsibilities, emergency support functions coordinate mission assignments and response work set forth in mission assignments. Next. Emergency support functions. What are emergency support functions? ESF provide the structure for coordinating federal interagency support for a federal response to an incident. They are a way to group functions that provide federal support to states and federal to federal support, both for Staff Work Act declared disasters and emergencies and for non-Staff Work Act incidents. Emergency support functions may approve and implement mission assignments, commit and coordinate agency assets, maintain situational awareness, and report on operations, and also serve as technical experts. Next. An emergency support function is not a single agency. It is an organization of multiple agencies that coordinate to provide a specific type of emergency response support. They were originally created to organize federal support for Staff Work Act incidents, but under the National Response Framework, emergency support functions may also be activated to assist any lead federal agency under any federal authority. For non-Staff Work Act responses, the funding source for federal agencies who participate will need to be determined on a case-by-case basis. Next. ESF 10, Oil and Hazardous Materials Response. What is ESF number 10? It is an oil and hazardous material response providing federal support in response to an actual or potential discharge and/or uncontrolled release of oil or hazardous materials when activated. The ESF 10 coordinator is EPA. The primary agencies are EPA and the Department of Homeland Security and Coast Guard. Support agencies among many, the Department of Energy, the Department of Health and Human Services, and others. Next. Just a brief introduction regarding ESF 10. The emergency support function number 10 may assess extent of contamination, contain, alleviate, treat, and dispose of oil or hazmat, and mitigate damage to natural resources. Next. ESF 3, Public Works and Engineering. What is ESF 3? It is a public works and engineering response coordinating and organizing the resources of the federal government to facilitate the delivery of multiple core capabilities. EPA is often asked to either provide support or lead the emergency support function number 3 responses, which is coordinated by the Corps of Engineers. ESF 3 coordinator is the Department of Defense and the Corps of Engineers, the primary agency, the Department of Defense and Corps of Engineers, and support agencies, among many, the Department of Agriculture, Department of the Interior, and the Environmental Protection Agency. With respect to EPA leadership and support for ESF 3, here are the primary support roles EPA provides to emergency support number 3. On the water infrastructure side, for instance, after a disaster hits, they can assist in determining the operating status of drinking water and wastewater systems. Also, EPA regions can call on their laboratory services and applied science divisions for the labs to be activated and mobile labs to be deployed to help analyze drinking water samples to assist with lifting boil water advisories. On the debris side, for instance, EPA regions can call their land and chemical and redevelopment divisions to provide some of this technical support. Next. Mission assignments. What is a mission assignment? A mission assignment is a work order issued by FEMA to another federal agency, directed completion of a specific task and citing funding, other managerial controls, and guidance. Mission assignments are given in anticipation of or response to a presidential declaration of an emergency or a major disaster. A mission assignment is the way the federal government provides emergency assistance to state and local jurisdictions. Next. Also, the mission assignment policy outlines key fiscal and administrative requirements and business standards associated with the mission assignment program. Next. Why are mission assignments issued? When states, federally recognized tribes or territories are overwhelmed and lack capabilities to provide or contract for services, mission assignment provide mechanisms to direct and reimburse other federal agencies for providing resources to support disaster operations. Next. Deployments. These employees, when listed as available, can deploy to perform disaster field activities directly related to specific disasters, emergencies, projects, or activities of a non-continuous nature. Next, please. Here are some regional deployments over the past 10 years. Thank you and have a good one.
Thank you, Joelle, for sharing that with us. Next up, we have two EPA employees that will be sharing their various experiences on deploying to support larger responses. So first, I'd like to introduce to you Kevin Gaynor. He's an emergency planner at EPA Region 3 in the Preparedness and Response branch. As an emergency planner, Kevin supports EPA's removal and emergency response mission, providing support to federal on-scene coordinators, as well as preparedness and response planning. Some of the duties in his position include coordinating the EPA Response Support Corps, or RSC, supporting the Regional Incident Coordination Team, coordinating with FEMA on responses and planning, and working in the Regional Emergency Operations Center.
Thank you, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Kevin Gaynor. I'm an emergency planner in EPA Region 3. And I've been asked to kind of go over some of the more recent deployments, or the deployments I've been able to do as part of EPA, and to kind of focus on Maui ESF3. But first, I've been with the EPA for about just had my 2-year anniversary. So in that time, I have been able to get out to some emergency responses. In fall 2022, I was the Region 3 EOC Emergency Operations Center was partially activated and supported the FEMA Region 3 RRCC, as Mike brought up before, during the partial activation for Hurricane Fiona and Ian. Luckily, there was no significant impacts from those hurricanes to Region 3. Next, in summer of 2023, I deployed to East Palestine train derailment in Ohio. I was out there supporting the data unit. Following that, most recently, I deployed to the Key Bridge response in Baltimore. I served as a liaison agency representative. Since the Coast Guard has the jurisdiction for environmental response in the coastal area, EPA was there as a supporting agency. So we had some agency representatives to provide support from EPA. And most recently, in the February 2024, I was deployed to Maui, the Maui Wildfire Response for ESF3. I was an assistant liaison officer, and I will be redeploying in June as a liaison officer. And for all these responses, I was also providing long-term support in the Region 3 EOC. Next slide. Oh, and before the next slide, just some quick pictures of each of the responses. These are the response pictures, and I always like including the pictures just to show the scale of the responses we are working on. Next slide. So what was EPA doing? So how did the EPA get involved with the Maui wildfires? So the Maui wildfires happened in August 2023. A few days later, EPA was given a mission assignments under ESF3 and ESF10. Those are their emergency support functions. 10 is for the hazardous material and oil. ESF3 is public works and engineering. Under that, EPA was given mission assignments for to assist the county of Maui in assessing their water infrastructure, their drinking water and sewer lines. On the ESF 10 side of things, that included the removal of hazardous materials, air monitoring, lithium-ion battery disposal, ash and soil stabilization. And the ESF 10 mission concluded in December 2023. Because EPA Region 3 was so heavily involved with East Palestine, we were prioritized to stick with East Palestine and not provide Region 9 support for Maui ESF 10. But East Palestine was winding down at the time that Maui ESF 3 was starting up, which was in January 2024 and is still ongoing. So we were able to provide significant support, deploy many members of our response support corps to the response. The current activities include drinking water assessing the drinking water system of Lahaina. This includes hydrant sampling, lateral sampling, and cutting and capping any contaminated lateral lines. Some challenges that have been found was this is EPA's first major ESF3 response. So with that, there are growing pains, and it's been a learning experience for everybody. The Water Division has been a huge piece of this response, and it's been great to have their experience. Another challenge was the size of the impacted area. Basically, a good portion of downtown Lahaina was burnt to the ground, and that scale of things is always a challenge. Another challenge was getting resources on the island and the cultural sensitivity concerns. All of Hawaii is just so rich in cultural history that every action we take as a federal agency has to have that cultural sensitivity in mind. Next slide. So I was deployed as an assistant liaison officer, working with the liaison officer and the rest of the IMT. We coordinated with FEMA Region 9, HIEMA, which is the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, and the County of Maui. This is just to make sure that everybody is working on the same page, that no one's stepping on anyone's toes, and that the mission gets done as effectively and efficiently as possible. As the liaison officer, you have to determine EPA's needs for while coordinating with FEMA, and that is mostly dealing with the mission assignments, which Joel talked about briefly before. And then you're coordinating with all the local response organizations and local cultural organizations to make sure that cultural concerns were addressed and making sure EPA was welcome. Additionally, I'm a member of provide long-term support through the Region 3 EOC, and I am one of the region's RSC coordinators. So with that, it is getting people out the door, getting people to the response, collecting availability, addressing staffing needs, coordinating with Region 9 on their needs, the training requirements, safety requirements, making sure everybody has the proper protective equipment before deploying, and handling all the the administrative and logistical needs for the response. The EOC is made up of many, many people, and it takes so much support to get people out to the field. But I believe we've been doing a great job so far. And next slide, and it's my last slide, and has a few pictures of what EPA is doing out in the response. On the left, it's the hydrant sampling, just spraying the water for the flushing of the hydrants. Below that is the sampling apparatuses and the sampling out in the field. Next to that, to the right, is the cutting and capping operations for the contaminated lines. EPA, above that, is one of the public meetings EPA is participating in, just providing the the County of Maui an update on EPA's action and progress. To the right of that is some pictures from our wastewater operations. We would send this rover down into the sewer lines to assess if any damage happened to these sewer lines. And below that is the CCTV camera output from those sewer lines. And below that is just a safety brief before night operations. This is happening between EPA, the county, our contractors, and safety is the #1 thing out there on this response. That's all I have. Thank you for letting me share my experience. Have a good day.
Thank you, Kevin. And before I introduce our last presenter, I just want to remind the participants, if you have any questions, please add them to the chat so that we can answer them at the end. Our next presenter that I'd like to introduce is Jenna O'Brien, who started working at EPA in August of 2020 after serving in the Peace Corps in Panama. She's a remedial project manager for the Superfund sites on federal facilities and a member of Region 3's Response Support Corps. So,
hey, thank you so much, Melissa, for the introduction. Yeah, so today, like similarly to Kevin, I'm going to speak a little bit about my experience on the Maui ESF3 response. But yeah, first a little bit about my background. As Melissa said, my regular job is as a remedial project manager for Superfund sites on federal facilities. And my background's in like environmental engineering. And also, as she mentioned, I previously was in the Peace Corps. So when I started at EPA in August 2020, I wanted to find opportunities to still be in the field and support communities. So the Response Support Corps was a great outlet to do that. It gives a lot of opportunities for people to be trained and use the skills they have in their normal job out in the field a little bit more. So one of my first deployments with the Response Support Corps involved doing data support for the East Palestine train derailment. There were a lot of different media types being sampled while we were there. So we were mainly working to upload, check that data, and then make sure people in leadership who were making decisions had organized ways to view and analyze the data that was being collected. And then more recently, I was supporting the Maui ESF3 response, where EPA helped assess the drinking water system in Lahaina after the wildfires that occurred in August 2023. And Kevin talked a lot about the role of an assistant liaison officer and a liaison officer. And originally, I was also deployed as an assistant liaison officer. But when I got there, operations were ramping up, and I ended up spending a lot of time sampling in the field. At that moment, we were sampling the drinking water laterals for VOCs and SVOCs. So any areas of contamination that were identified in the system could be cut and capped to keep the contamination from spreading throughout the rest of the drinking water system. And yeah, I would say it was a big testament to EPA's coordination with the county and FEMA and the priorities for making sure that the work was done expeditiously, but also thoroughly and carefully. So there was a lot of concurrent work going on while I was there. You know, we'd be sending sampling teams out to go check out the drinking water laterals, but at the same time, Army Corps was still doing debris removal from people's properties. And yeah, there was a lot of careful coordination, especially regarding safety and like who was working in what areas. And also a lot of coordination with the County of Maui and the state of Hawaii through the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency. And I would say, like Kevin also touched on this, but yeah, the cultural sensitivity was a really important aspect of this response, especially for folks who were working in operations in the field. There were regular cultural sensitivity trainings that happened for the EPA staff who were responding, and people in the field also work closely with cultural monitors just to ensure that in areas where, you know, people had passed away or people's homes had burnt, like people were not flushing water lines towards the property or flushing, or like flushing towards culturally significant walls and other, other things around people's homes. So every workday we started and ended with a pule, which is a prayer. And yeah, I think that was a really a significant part of the response. And yeah, EPA just tried to work in like a sensitive way with the county and with the state. So that's, yeah, that was my experience. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jenna. So we will open for questions from the chat first. And I think the first one, Mike and Austin, for FEMA, any trainings for senior executives or executive level that may be open for state, local, and other partners?
Yep. So through our
response.
Yep. So through our Emergency Management Institute, which I can post the link in a second here. There's a lot of online independent study courses that cover a lot of that. There's also a lot of in-residence courses for executives that FEMA runs, so I can share that. And there's like the national, I think it's the Emergency Management Executive Academy that are open to state and local officials, and I think there's also some private sector courses as well. So I can share that link in the chat.
Thank you. For another question, so it was asked, why is public health not included? Because it is different than exposure assessment. So I don't, this may have been in reference to Reading. Ashley, if you want to explain how our air monitoring was then used to ensure public safety was protected.
Yeah, sure. Essentially, we set up an air monitoring perimeter for sort of dust particulate as well as chemicals around the facility. And we really didn't see any significant levels of anything on our monitors. A lot of the time it was reading all zeros. And when we saw something that wasn't a zero, we would go investigate the location. And a lot of times it was someone parked their truck right next to our meter and the exhaust was going right into the meter. So we really didn't see any levels that weren't caused by sort of external non-site related events at the Reading drum site.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any additional questions, so if our attendees have any, they can enter them into the chat. Oh, we have one that came through. What does the EPA do when they become aware of a disaster in a state and arrive on the site and the local agencies say that they can handle the problem? Ashley, do you want to explain how we work with our state and local partners?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of pre-planning activities with our state and local counterparts to try to build those relationships ahead of time. Most of the time, if a state feels that they can handle the incident, we will, kind of take a step back. But there are some instances where the incident is significant enough that we feel there needs to be a federal presence. And in those instances, we usually try to sort of integrate with what's already happening. So one example of that, we had a chlorine release a couple of years ago. The state that was impacted had several, they had evacuations of the entire town due to a chlorine release at a facility. The state had unified kind of command set up with locals and were sort of working the response. But we felt on the federal side that due to the large amount of evacuations and the hazards of chlorine that we needed to have a presence at that spill. So we responded and integrated with the state and helped out with some additional air monitoring. So, we have to respond to the things that we feel really need our presence, but we tend to have those relationships ahead of time and have the states know kind of where we go and what we need to do when we need to do it. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and we are at time, so I'd like to turn it over to Ria to close us out.
Sure. Thank you to all our wonderful speakers today. It was a really engaging panel. Next up, we have the lunch panel, which is titled Two Parts Perspective to One Part Equity, a conversation with Dar Williams and Russell Armstrong. That's going to start at 12:15 p.m. So you have a short break to get over there. Please find that session by returning to the Zoom events lobby. And thank you all so much for joining.